Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. My name is Mike Olsen. I'm the CEO of Sterile Array. And with me is John Neister. John is our Senior Vice President of Marketing and Customer Experience. John is actually one of the co-founders of Sterile Array. He and his brother, Ed Neister, who is a physicist by way of background, started our company about 20 years ago. And the company got its start as a result of Ed's work in the laser business. Ed actually, as I said, a physicist by trade, but he actually developed laser technology that was acquired by Raytheon Corporation as part of Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. Many of you might recall what that was. And his lasers actually had the ability to not only track ICBMs, but to eventually shoot them down as well. And so he sold that company to Raytheon. And at the time he sold it, he was asked by a local wastewater treatment plant to come in and take a look. This is Dover, New Hampshire, I would say. Come in and take a look at their use of UVC, traditional UVC at 254 nanometers, to try and eradicate bacteria in their discharge. So our company was formed around Ed's work associated with the Dover wastewater treatment plant. Ed actually stumbled upon some research at the University of New Hampshire that was conducted way back in 1938. And that research actually looked at all of the wavelengths within the UVC spectrum as opposed to just 254. And Ed speculated that there would be other wavelengths within the spectrum that had the potential to be equally as germicidal, if not more so, than 254, and potentially even safe for human exposure. So the only problem is that there was no way to really produce these other wavelengths. 254 lamps are produced by either low pressure or medium pressure mercury lamps. They've been around since the 1870s. But the only way to produce other wavelengths is, at least at that time, back in 1998, was through a technology called excimer lamps. And the Germans and the Russians had developed excimer lamps. So Ed went out and bought a lamp from Germany, from Heraeus Corporation, and he went over to UNH and he started testing the excimer lamp, which happened to produce the 222 nanometer wavelength. He started testing the efficacy of the wavelength for the disinfection of various pathogens, virus, bacteria, mold, fungus, prions, and so forth. And he quickly ascertained that, in fact, 222 was very powerful in terms of its germicidal capabilities, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that is. In fact, much more so than 254 in certain cases. And so we formed a company, John and Ed formed a company around the ability to make these lamps and put them in very specialized type of housings for very specific disinfection purposes. And that's how the company got its start. And we've been on the seacoast of New Hampshire now since that time. And we make all of our lamps here in New Hampshire. All of our products are made here in New Hampshire. And before the pandemic, we were operating as a very small company, maybe making 10 to 12 lamps per month. And again, for the purpose of specialized disinfection applications, such as hospital and pharmaceutical clean rooms, HVAC systems that were in hospitals, and other large buildings, commercial buildings. We did a lot of work with the USDA in terms of testing our technology on agricultural applications. And we made a living, John likes to say, in the cannabis industry, because we were able to eradicate powdery mildew in cannabis grow operations. So then the pandemic hit. And as you might expect, as many of you probably did, you started to research different technologies that might avail itself to basically getting rid of COVID, aerosolized COVID. Once everybody was in agreement that it was actually an aerosolized issue transmitted through the air as opposed to surface, then people started to stumble upon what we branded a long time ago called FAR UV. And FAR UV is basically the moniker that we put on it back around the year 2000 to distinguish 222 from 254. And that's, if you were to Google FAR UV, hopefully you'll come upon our company. But you'll certainly come upon a lot of different companies that are now making FAR UV lamps and products, and you'll come upon a lot of research that's been conducted over the last few years regarding it. So our inbox went from basically nobody in the inbox to about 10,000 inquiries in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Overwhelmed us, quite frankly. And so we had to really take a step back and talk about how we were going to operate as a business, given the fact that at the time we were the industry leader by far. We were the only company that was actually making lamps at that time. And we assessed that probably the best course for us would be a dual-pronged approach, which would be to license our technology to manufacturing partners that could in turn make their own lamps and sell it under their brand, but at the same time ramp up our production capabilities, which we did, We built a lamp station that has a capability to produce 60,000 lamps per year. And even though we thought that was going to be just scratching the surface in terms of the demand, not getting as much press or publicity anymore, the demand for far UV lamps in commercial places is not quite as significant as it was, say, a year and a half ago. However, because of the other applications that we service, and I'll get into that use cases, our demand has increased quite significantly just in the last year outside of COVID. But we all know COVID hasn't gone away. And if it's not this variant, it's going to be the next. And in fact, it's probably going to be even worse. And the next pandemic is probably going to be even more problematic than what we just went through. So we really believe in this technology. We actually thought that the federal government was going to come in and take our technology from us and make us the next Manhattan Project. But they went a different direction, and they went the pharmaceutical direction. So we fully expect that eventually, the federal government will wake up, and everybody else will too, to the fact that, the vaccinations are simply just not the answer, all told, long term. That we have to have technology in place that protects people where they are, where they live, and where they go. So we really believe very strongly in that. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the technology at a fairly high level, and then dive into kind of the specifics of how 222 is so different than 254 applications are. And then eventually we'll get into some of the use cases and the products that we've developed over the last few years to apply to these use cases. So I'm sure some of you have seen a simulation like this, if not this one itself. This is a simulation that illustrates what happens when somebody
coughs once and spreads about 100,000 droplets. Large droplets are shown in blue and green. Most of these fall to the ground within 1 minute. But the micro droplets, shown in red, continue to drift. This simulation uses only micro droplets. 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, the micro droplets are still floating in place.
So the simulation does a really good job of making a number of points. One is that the conventional wisdom that we were told that 6 feet social distancing would keep us safe is in fact not true. It also makes the point that you can inhale a viral load sufficient to make you ill and catch COVID, for instance, in a very short amount of time. And so we don't have the luxury, and I'll just state it right here, we do not have the luxury of waiting for an air exchange or even 10 minutes with a small, tiny excimer lamp to protect ourselves. We don't have that luxury. We have to throw more power at it, and we have to do it quicker, and we have to be able to get these aerosolized particles very, very quickly before they reach another person, and certainly before they inhale a viral load sufficient to make it sick. So the third point that this simulation illustrates is that, in fact, the aerosolized viral particles are different sizes. So you have large ones, you have medium ones, we can get into the specifics of how big these are. Some of them are smaller than our wavelength. And so they're totally encapsulated by our wavelength if a photon hits it. Some of them are larger and require maybe 2 photons as opposed to 3 photons. And it's a whole separate discussion. But needless to say, what we know is that you have to throw a lot of power over a long distance in order to protect people that are in a room and in this close proximity. So with that, I'm going to pause to see if anybody has any questions. I see there's 5 in the chat, Kara. I don't know if
That's John asking people where they're from.
Oh.
Does anybody have questions right now about the power thrown in a room or the
Jessica.
Oh yes, you have questions, Jessica?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to type it out because but I'm curious about the effects of that on the benefit. It's not going to say, oh, you're a bad virus and you're a good bacteria. So how does that affect the good stuff that we need that's hanging out on our skin and stuff?
Yeah, great question. We get asked that a lot. So the biome, the human skin biome, if you will, is all the bacteria and all the viruses that are in that biome are going to be affected by our technology. We're not selective. We're going to get everything. But the really good news is that if you walk out of a room, there's going to be, within seconds, millions of new bacteria to replenish your biome. Think of it this way. Think of it as washing your hands. And you know the sensation you get when you wash your hands, that your skin feels a little taut and a little dry, maybe, and whatever it is, that's because you've basically destroyed the biome on your hands. But within about 10 or 15 minutes, it's totally replenished. So the biome is not of a concern. There's plenty of research out there to support what I'm saying. Happy to share it with you, but it is a very good question.
I'd be interested in that. If you could share that stuff with us, that'd be cool. Thanks.
Sure. I don't know that'll be. It's the research papers, but we can certainly send them to Kara, and she can distribute them for you.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's, because of this technology, there's been quite a lot of research done on this, but we're definitely not selective. We get them all.
I have another question. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, but is there a time limit then because of this, like, that we have to only stay in it for so long and then we need to turn it off?
So it's a great question, and there is no quote unquote time limit. However, there is a non-governmental agency called the ACGIH that has published for decades standards in terms of exposure limits for such things as VOCs, ultraviolet light, chemicals, those types of things. And the standard for far UV for years was what we term as 22 millijoules per centimeter squared over 8 hours in a 40-hour work week. So they look at an 8-hour day and a 40-hour work week, and they have made statements, determinations, whatever, about what is considered safe for our wavelength. And it's been the same for 40 years. And then 2 years ago, they upped it by a factor of 5. And last year, they upped it by a factor of 20. And it's because of the research that's been conducted and out there. And I'll get into some of the details about that. But the current standard now for skin exposure is 479 millijoules per centimeter squared in an 8-hour day over a 40-hour week. Now, here's the interesting part, and nobody really ever talks about this, and most people don't even know this, is that those are time-weighted values. So if it's a 4-hour exposure 5 days a week, it's actually double 479. If it's a 2-hour exposure, it's 4 times 479 in terms of the dosage. So when you look at dosage and you look at the TLVs, what are called the TLVs, threshold limit values, it's actually a time-weighted value. And you have to really understand exactly what does that mean in terms of exposure time. And then the other thing that Columbia has done quite nicely is they published research about, okay, so you're in a room with far UV lamps. Are you staring into the lamps? Are you always underneath them? Are they always in the same direction? No. And so that also increases the level of dosage, if you will. Now, to rest assured, most of the lamps that are on the market right now can't get anywhere near 479, not even if they're on for weeks, because they're so underpowered and they're so small. Our lamps, because they're very well powered and actually can be powered up to 1.2 kilowatts, can achieve that dosage. But the way that we configure our lamps for any installation whatsoever is to never exceed that 479. Even though somebody says to us, well, I'm only in the school bus for an hour, so we could literally take liberty and say 8 times 479. We don't. We always stick at that threshold limit value. And I'll explain more about this as we get into it. Any other questions? All right, let me see if I can advance this here. All right, so most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with UVC, traditional UVC operating at 254 nanometers. As I said, it's been around since the 1870s. The French used UVC to disinfect their water system of tuberculosis back in 1908. Here in the US, we've been using it in healthcare environments and wastewater treatment plants for decades. And in fact, we had a brief exposure in the public sector in schools by putting UVC lamps in schools in the 1940s. That didn't go so well because the kids got sunburned, but so that's where people started to realize that UVC wasn't safe. But our technology at 222 nanometers operates as part of the UVC spectrum. But again, we've branded it far UV to make sure that we can understand exactly what does that mean in terms of the difference. So safety, let's talk about safety. So the most distinguishing characteristic of 222 as opposed to 254 is the safety of our wavelength. And when I talk about safety, here's what I mean. Our wavelength is not absorbed any further than the outside layer of the human skin, known as the stratum corneum. Stratum corneum is sometimes referred to as the dead skin layer. It's essentially all protein. So our wavelength does not penetrate that protein, as thus does not cause what's known as erythema or sunburn, unlike 254, because 254 penetrates further, much further into the skin, and will cause that erythema. And in severe cases with prolonged exposure, will cause cancer. So that is the most distinguishing characteristic in terms of safety between our wavelength and 254. There's another characteristic though, and that's the actual lamp themselves. Our lamps are made of 99.8% fused silica, almost completely pure fused silica, non-crystalline forms, have a tensile strength that's 1,000 times greater than glass. 254 mercury lamps are silica and glass lamps, and they contain mercury, which is environmentally very hazardous. And in fact, if you do break a 254 lamp, it poses an environmental hazard. Not to mention, disposing of these lamps has gotten to be very, very expensive. If our lamp breaks, the krypton chlorine gas in molecular form is not environmentally hazardous. And believe me, we've been put through our paces by OSHA on this one. So it's not environmentally hazardous. And the only time we've ever had a lamp actually break was when a forklift went through a pallet of our lamps. They're very, very, very strong lamps. Here's another thing to keep in mind, and we're the only manufacturer that can do this. When these lamps expire and they're warranted for 30,000 hours, it's a prorated lifetime warranty on the lamp of 30,000 hours. We take them back and we discharge the old gas and we put in new gas at about 30 cents on the original dollar. So our lamps are recyclable, very, very environmentally friendly in that regard. No other manufacturer can make that claim. When you talk about safety, before the pandemic, there wasn't a lot of research about the safety of 222, but thanks to Columbia and Kobe University, Hiroshima University, Arizona, Colorado, and others, we now have a bevy of research to point to that's all peer-reviewed and longitudinal in nature. And why that's important is that everybody is concerned about the longitudinal effect of exposure to this wavelength as opposed to just a periodic or incidental effect. And so the research all points to the same thing, that the wavelength is safe. And in fact, the research points to something even more dramatic, and that is the limits, the threshold limits that are set right now at 479 for skin and 165 for eye exposure. They're artificially low, way low still. I mean, these things could be in the thousands as to what the research points to. And John will tell you, because his brother Ed did it to him, that John was exposed to 5,000 millijoules on his hand at one point, and with no effect whatsoever. And again, we've got all sorts of data on that too. But all the research points to the same thing. It's very, very, very safe.
The 222 works fine. What I'm curious about, this is just from a personal standpoint, the emitters that you're making, so they've got gas in them. They're not solid state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So essentially, you're using a very durable, did you say boron silicate glass?
It's fused silica.
Okay.
Non-crystalline.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So, but essentially, what you're able to do is you're able to take the device back when it's lost its spunk. You re-evacuate it, you re-backfill it with whatever gas mixture you're using for rare gas, and you're good to go. As far as having basically a new device. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
What keeps it at 222 where you don't get any other composite frequencies mixed in with it?
So Ed has determined over the years, and he's been making these lamps now for over 20 years, 25 years, that there are 21 factors that go into the production of the lamp, such things as the gas mixture itself, the pressure they form the molecules, all sorts of levers, if you will, that he can adjust to create the output factors. And those output factors include the lamp life, the ozone production, the secondary and tertiary wavelengths that may exist. So all these 21 different factors that go into it, we've learned over the years how to adjust them to get the output that we want. Now, we do have clients that have asked for lamps that can produce ozone because they want that for a specific purpose, like a cigar bar, for instance. We generally will produce lamps that are less than the NIOSH and the CARB limits of ozone production. Almost all the time we would do that.
Okay.
And so the same thing relates to the actual output of other wavelengths, because all excimer lamps do produce secondary and tertiary outputs. They do.
Right.
Ours happens to be, because of the way that we produce and manufacture lamps, the output of 257, which is our secondary wavelength, is anywhere between 1/80th and 1/90th the output of 222. And that's because our competitors were up in the 14% range in terms of their secondary output. And that's why they had to use a filter. We don't have to use a filter, because even at the 479 millijoules, which is the TLV for 222, that only amounts to about 5.6 millijoules of 257, and the TLV for 257 is 10 millijoules. So even if we max out the TLV for 222, we're still under the TLV for 257, which is where our secondary output is. LED technology has not availed itself yet to being able to produce 222 at any power level whatsoever that would even possibly be able to be used in a commercial application. So LEDs are good down to about 265 in terms of their output. Below that, they just aren't there yet. It's probably 5 or 6 years away.
You said that you're prorating this on 30,000 hours service life, that's good. I mean, because most LEDs, well, Ushios are 3,000 hour service life, which means you're going to be throwing them away pretty often, and they're not cheap. And so what you're saying is yours is going to last a good long while. Yeah. Okay.
Points of clarification. Our lamps are rated for 30,000 hours of runtime, not duty cycle. Okay.
Okay.
Ushio pulses their lamps, and they go on for a second or two, and they're off for a minute or two. So
Understood.
that's how they get to 3,000 hours, by the way. So ours are 30,000 hours of actual runtime.
Yeah. Well,
back to the actual germ savers. When you guys talk about like exposure and things, because most people, I think that's the kind of unit they would buy. I hear you say, oh, we can make them at this power or that power or whatever. So maybe if you want to include, like, for the sabers, like, you can run it at 8 hours and you won't hit the 479 threshold. You could run it at 10 hours. How long, John, can you sit under that light and not hit that really low threshold?
If you have to be less than a foot away from it, or about 2 feet away, to get any sort of dose. And that's why the saber is so effective close when you're doing surfaces, because you're a ½ inch away. But if we always say at least 5 feet, you're good for 24 hours.
Okay.
It's because surface disinfection is much more challenging than air disinfection. Air disinfection, it only takes one photon to envelop an aerosolized coronavirus particle and destroy it. And that happens literally at the speed of light. So if you think of photons being put out from the lamp as a probability equation, what you're having is you have the photons being put out at the lamp. At the lamp, it's a dense cloud of photons. 5 feet away, it's a less dense. 15 feet, it's a less dense. So the probability of actually encountering a aerosolized coronavirus particle is in fact related to the distance from the lamp itself. But it only takes one photon to, as I said, encapsulate an aerosolized coronavirus particle and destroy it.
How many times can we double the distance away from that lamp before we're essentially have nothing to work with?
So we use a very general approximation for air disinfection of about 1 foot for every 2 watts in terms of effective distance for air disinfection, certainly not for surface disinfection. But if you look at the probability of a photon encountering an aerosolized coronavirus particle in a very short amount of time, it works out pretty well in terms of the testing that we've done. So a 150 watt lamp can get you about 75 feet of linear distance. Our lamps operate at 160 degree viewing angle from the lamp itself. So that's the angle that we're putting the lamps out. It's obviously less dense at the ends of the lamp than it is at the center of the lamp. But you got to keep in mind that our lamps are they're incoherent light, which means that they're putting photons out in every single direction from the lamp.
Yeah.
It's not, and that makes a big difference in terms of applying the cosine law to determining exactly what the fluence is coming out of the lamps. And I don't want to get too technical here, but I think you probably know what I'm talking about.
because I've used the rule of thumb with like LEDs when they're recommending 222, and they say, oh, we've got a 4-watt LED, and I'll be perfectly honest, my inner bullshit filter clogs immediately, because it's like, this isn't going to work. After it's a foot away, it may kill something on the surface of the emitter, but by the time you're a foot away, it's like there isn't anything left to kill anything with.
We've got some pretty nifty ways of identifying the efficacy of the technology. We've got dosimeters. They're actually just little cards that are put out by a company called Intelligo. They compare our lamps to others. We're able to determine exactly, okay, how long does it take at 50 feet to get 10 millijoules of dosage? And those little dosimeters do a pretty good job of it. And John can probably show you that later in the presentation if we have time. One other important difference between 222 and 254 is how fast the 222 wavelength can actually what we call deactivate a pathogen. And that's an operative word in that there's a difference between inactivation and deactivation. So for instance, when we put our lamps in a HVAC air handler to disinfect not just the coils and keep them clean, but to disinfect the air in a single pass, we can get up to a log4 reduction of Staph aureus in a single pass, which is about 1/8 of a second to 1/10 of a second. So it operates very effectively and very, very quickly. And this was illustrated in a study conducted at St. Andrews University a couple of years ago, where they took a room-sized chamber about half the size of a typical classroom, and they put 5 Ushio 15-watt lamps in the ceiling, and they pumped that chamber full of Staph aureus, and then they had interval periods, air sampling interval periods of 5 minutes. And their first sample, they took 5 minutes after the room was full of Staph aureus, and after they had turned the lamps on, yielded that there was no Staph aureus in the room any longer. So essentially what they were doing even with these underpowered lamps was laying claim to the fact that they're able to clear the air in this chamber of any trace of Staph aureus. Now, what's really interesting about this particular study was that they continued to pump the room full of Staph aureus. They didn't stop. It was continuous. And they measured every 5 minutes, and they found the same result. There was no presence of Staph aureus. So what that speaks to is the fact that the technology literally operates at the speed of light. And even though these lamps are woefully underpowered, and especially compared to ours, they still did a good job of eradicating Staph aureus in a very, very quick order. Now, what St. Andrews ended up saying was that, at least for this particular test, this equated to about 3,000 air exchanges per hour in terms of the ability to clear the air of Staph aureus in this short interval of time. So really, really significant study and kind of a watershed for us. So when you talk about the efficacy, you not only talk about the speed at which it operates, but you talk about how good is the technology of deactivating pathogens. And the big difference between 254 and 222 relative to pathogen deactivation is that 254 doesn't deactivate pathogens. It inactivates pathogens. It creates what are called dimers, because the RNA and the DNA within pathogens absorb, the peak absorption is at 254. Ours has a different onset mechanism. The protein layers of pathogens have the peak absorption at 222. So we actually are absorbed by the proteins, not so much the RNA and the DNA. And why that's important is that when 254 is absorbed by the RNA and the DNA in pathogens, it creates these dimers. I liken them, to simplify it, as nicks and fissures, if you will, within the RNA and the DNA. And through a process called photoreactivation, that is the pathogen being exposed to typical sunlight or blue light, they can repair themselves. The RNA and the DNA can repair themselves even to the point of replication. So you got to throw a tremendous amount of dosage at a pathogen of 254 in order to get it to the point where it won't reconstitute itself. And this is why in agriculture, all the applications of UVC take place in the evening, because they need this dark period in order to inactivate the pathogens. If you look at these two photographs in the lower left here, and the top photograph is a mold spore that was presented with 222, and you can see what happened. The protein layer absorbed the 222 wavelength. Those photons that were absorbed by the proteins, their energy packets, they got to go somewhere. So what they do is they blow apart the chemical bonds of the proteins, and they literally rip the pathogen apart. 254, which is the lower left corner in gray, you can see the nicks and the fissures, and that's the RNA and the DNA creating what are called the dimers. And again, these dimers can repair themselves. And there's been a lot of research done on photoreactivation. Again, if you're interested, we can get this through Cara to you as well. But that's why you don't see 254 being used in HVAC air handlers for anything but keeping biomass from the coils.
Essentially, what you're saying is that your 222 is able to deactivate the protein envelope, and then and if that's dead, then the genetic material just becomes.
That's correct. That's absolutely.
That's what. Okay.
All right. So here we go. So when you speculate as to how do we measure success relative to our technology, we measure it by saying how much dosage of 222 do you need to apply to a pathogen to get a given level of reduction. And what this slide illustrates for MS2 phage is that if we apply 20 millijoules of dosage, we'll get slightly greater than a log 2 or 99% reduction. If we apply 40 millijoules, just up it to 40, now we're getting a log 5 reduction. And this applies regardless of the pathogen. Now every pathogen is different in terms of the amount of dosage that you need to apply to get to a given log reduction. But it perfectly illustrates the point of how we go about calculating how much power and what proximity our lamps need to be in order to get a given level of reduction for a particular pathogen. When people ask us to do surface disinfection, we have to take another variable into consideration, and that is what is the composition of the surface material itself, because not all surfaces are created equal. And this slide illustrates that for this particular pathogen, 50 millijoules will yield us slightly greater than a log 2 on metal, slightly greater than a log 3 on plastic, and a really good log 5 on glass. And so this is part of the calculus that goes into any configuration that we do for surface disinfection. You all know, and I'm sure have heard about this particular study, the Kramer study, where it was published in 2006, primarily for the benefit of the healthcare institutions, but it looks at the antibiotic-resistant pathogens and ascertains how long can they actually live on surfaces. Well, recently this has been updated for both C. diff and MRSA to say that those pathogens can live on surfaces for up to 12 months. So they're very problematic, and obviously now we've got the new fungal issue in hospitals and all sorts of things going on that we have to have other means of disinfecting. Clorox wipes just don't do it anymore. So if you look at our product portfolio, we have designed over the last 20 years products for specific applications. And when we look at air disinfection products, you can see we put our lamps in HVAC units. That's a 40,000 CFM air handler right there. And we also have a product for residential HVAC as well. And this is an air duct product. And so we size the lamps in terms of its power and its length based on the CFM rating of the HVAC unit itself. Most residential HVAC units are no more than about 1,000 CFM. So we can get by with a relatively small lamp and an HVAC. And so whatever your air exchange rate is in your house, this particular lamp will yield that very, very quick disinfection on a single pass. And that's how we size it. Before the pandemic and before the safety data was published, people weren't comfortable putting our lamps in line of sight exposure to humans. And so we developed a room canister that has our lamp in it and a HEPA filter. And this was designed for medical treatment areas and also for conference rooms. We haven't sold very many of these now that people are buying the lamps for direct exposure. If you look at air products that do both air and surface disinfection, what you see here is a different set of configurations based on the need and the application. So we have recessed ceiling fixtures called a luminaire, and that's usually what we spec for ceilings that are 9 or 10 feet or higher. And then we have a wall-mounted sconce that is a line of sight fixture. But for instance, in a classroom, we would have 2 of these, and one would be at the end wall and one would be on a side wall. And the reason for that is they operate on a line of sight principle. So if you have a student between a fixture and another student, that space between the 2 students is not being disinfected with a single fixture. However, if you have one on a 90-degree wall, you're getting complete disinfection throughout the room itself. And as I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of work with the USDA. So we developed a very specific product for conveyor systems and agriculture. It directs all of the photon energy to a particular spot on a conveyor. We also have the Germbuster Saver, which you see here. This is a product that's slightly over 3 pounds. It's ergonomically balanced, so you never get tired holding it. And it runs on AC or DC. And we power the DC version with off-the-shelf Ego batteries, which you can buy in any Lowe's or hardware store or on Amazon. and you get about 3 hours useful life on a single charge of these batteries. So this has been our most successful product by far. It has both commercial and consumer applications. We have customers that are taking this with them wherever they travel. It happens to fit in a 26-inch suitcase, but we also sell it with its own case too. It's actually a gun case that we've modified for it. So again, very, very powerful. It was designed specifically for surface applications in terms of directing the photons from a very small area on the lamp. But as you can see behind John, he's got one on a stand, and we've done a number of conventions and conferences and where we actually just put these on stands in a room to protect everybody, and it's caught on. So people are now buying the stand and setting them up in their homes as well. A couple of products that are undergoing redesign right now include our air surface disinfection unit. We're actually put another paddle on it to increase the coverage area to about 1,000 square feet. And then our germ buster, our pathogen reduction box, was designed for Children's Hospital in Boston. They've asked us to make a bigger version of it, and which we're in the process of doing that right now. So anything you put in there, this actually has 2 lamps in it and a quartz plate. So anything you put in there will disinfect whatever's put on that plate, typically in about 8 to 10 seconds, depending on the pathogen. This is a new product that we've just come out with. It's a recessed ceiling fixture made by an HVAC partner of ours called Mestec. It's a 2x2 configuration that draws air up through the grate and it circles the air past the lamp and then discharges it out the side vents there that you see. They designed this unit, it's called a chill beam unit, for adjusting the temperature in hospital rooms, because hospital rooms don't want to share, hospital patient rooms, I should say, don't want to share the air with the next patient room over for obvious reasons. And so this particular unit was able to basically run and cycle the air in the room itself. And then now that we've put our lamp in it, they get the added benefit of being able to disinfect that air. So whatever the exchange rate is, it's typically 4 to 6 exchanges the way that we configure this. We're gonna get that great disinfection at that exchange rate.
I know there was, you're probably going to get to this, but I know that there was a question in the chat. Oh, I see Kathleen has a question. There was also a question in the chat about placement. So I'm pretty sure you'll eventually get to where, I heard you say to go ahead and put them on like perpendicular walls, but there was a question too. So, but I'll let Kathleen ask hers before we talk about that.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this. And can you just help me imagine how this would be used in a home environment? And also you mentioned bringing the one portable unit when people travel. What applications would that be good for? Thank you.
Well, we stumbled upon that. We actually were asked by the Pittsburgh Steelers to come out and look at putting our technology in Heinz Field, specifically their locker rooms and their practice areas. And as part of that, we happened to stay at a hotel, and John had his air sampling unit and his Petri dishes and his surface sampling swabs. And we swabbed various areas of that hotel room. And I'm just going to tell you and say this as bluntly as I can. It's the most infested place you'd ever want to be, except maybe an airplane. So we found that through the surface sampling and air sampling, that there was an application for this saber for people to travel with and basically set it up and at least disinfect the air instantaneously. You never want to use a comforter in a hotel room, we'll guarantee that, or sit on the couch. But outside of that, at least with the saber, you can very, very quickly disinfect other areas, high touch areas of the room, including the sinks and the toilet and things like that. We sent this information, this data to Hilton, and they thought, we were hijacking them, but it did get them to the table and express an interest in making a recommendation to their franchisees to use the technology. But we have customers that are taking this when they travel for the hotel rooms, for going to the dentist, for various applications like on a bus. They can't run it on an airplane yet because the airlines won't let them do that. But definitely anywhere they go, that if they're especially immunocompromised, they need to have this added protection. I will tell you this: these little units that are powered at 3 watts or 5 watts or even 15 watts, they're not going to do the trick. If somebody's sneezing on you and you're depending on one of those units to protect you, it's not going to work. And so you're just kind of wasting your money with those. They simply don't put off enough fluence of photons to protect you. And you saw that from the very first slide, which was simulation of how the viral particles travel so quickly. You don't have the luxury of waiting 8 or 10 minutes at 6 feet to protect yourself. You simply don't have that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but the saber itself is particularly flexible in terms of its application.
Can I just say that, Kathleen, one example from my personal life, I have a saber, and one of my children who doesn't live at home, he goes to work. Now he works in like a research laboratory facility, so he's got like a baseline CO2 level of about 400 while he sits at his desk, and he's already got like 12 air exchanges in there because they do like gene therapy for rare and orphan diseases. So he has sort of a unique situation, but that's still more exposure than we would have like in our everyday life. And so when he comes to see us, he used to have to do like a very strict, 10-day, like, I'm not going to go, have any exposure, not work, not anything. And then he does like 3 serial PCRs and then a NAT the morning of, and then, and then he would come in the house. But now that we have our saber, he still doesn't do anything but go to work and come home, and he wears a mask during the time that he's at work. But we just feel better because we can put it in our dining room. Just like John has it, we can put it in the corner of our dining room. We can keep everybody basically, within 10 or 15 feet of it. And so it's a layered approach. We talk a lot about layered approaches. And so for us, it's the, I'm wearing a mask. I'm avoiding any kinds of exposures before I come see you. I'm still taking my test. I'm still taking my 3 to 4 tests a week before I come see you. And now we have a UV layer also when I come see you. So that's just one example of how we've used it to make our visits, like with our family, safer. And so as we listen to Mike and John talk, like, I'm thinking the holidays are coming. I'm thinking about like my kids' homeschool pods and how we maneuver them, especially as it gets colder and we have to come indoors. Those are just some of the other applications that this technology has potential to make safer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and let me expound for a minute on why our lamps, which are much more powerful and much larger than these small little competitive lamps from Ushio and others, and why that's important. So all excimer lamps operate with an optical efficiency of somewhere between 9 and 18%. And what I mean by that is the input power, say, is 100 watts. They're basically putting out 9 to 15, maybe as much as 18 in certain cases, 18 watts of irradiance from that lamp. And that's just the efficiency at which these units operate. Ushio happens to be on the low end of that with 9%. We happen to be on kind of the middle to high end with 15% with our optical efficiency. Now, the photons are put out and they're measured, the fluence is measured at millijoules per centimeter squared. So if you have an Ushio product where they have 4 lamps in one of their products, 2 lamps in the other, that is basically a 2-dimensional surface output of, say, 1 inch by 2.5 inches, you've got 1 centimeter. Did I say that right? Yeah, 1 inch by 2.5 inches. You've got 2.5 square inches of output. You take our lamps, which are 360 degrees, and they're anywhere from 14 inches to 23 inches. And so the calculation of that surface area is pi times d times the length of the lamp. You're talking now somewhere between 10 and 30 times the surface area of one of our lamps versus Ushio. And they have the compounded problem of they have a filter, and that reduces the optical efficiency by 60% from what it would be if they didn't have a filter. What I'm saying is they're not putting out a lot of photons, and that translates into efficacy. It's a direct correlation. And so we haven't made a stink of this in the marketplace, but this is the first time I'm actually bringing it up with people that we don't normally talk to about this. But we're going to, and it's important because we're seeing a lot of people buying these $200, $300, $400, $500 units, even $2,000 lamps that simply can't get the job done. And it's a waste, and it's actually going to harm our industry long term. And we're very, very confident in our ability to display our capabilities from a mathematical standpoint. And if any of you have any questions about that, we'd be happy to work through it with you. So a couple new products that we have that are being
Mike, I think Kyle has his hand up for a question for you about it.
Go ahead.
Hi guys, glad to be here. Proud owner of a Saber in the past month or so, and I had a question regarding when you are needing to be within 5 feet of this unit. I know we talked about 24 hours being the length of time, as you said. kind of echoing a question in the comments as well from Judy, when you're at a dentist appointment or like a chemotherapy appointment, a child's appointment, and you want to have this hanging on a wall bracket or in that room, and it needs to be something where it can't be 5 feet away, what is the safety idea regarding that you would suggest?
It actually is safe. And the reason it's safe is that I hearken back to the TLVs, the ACGIH TLVs, which say that at least for skin exposure, you can have 479 millijoules in 8 hours, 5 times a week. And if you have 4 hours of exposure 5 times a week, now you're up to double that, which is 950 or 60 or whatever. And if you're only in there for 2 hours, you have 4 times that, which is 1600 millijoules. Well, you're not going to get 1600 millijoules unless you're 4 inches or 3 inches from the lamp in 2 hours. So you can actually have it. Now, what'll happen is if you're too close to the lamp, you're going to get dry eye because it will create that syndrome. It's not going to harm the eye. It just creates dry eye. So I would say, we say 5 feet just to make sure that, nobody gets in trouble. But the reality is it's all based on the dosage over time. And you really got to have it really close for a very long time to get to the dosage limits that are set forth. And even saying that, the ACGIH, everybody knows, has set artificially low limits. So I'm being long-winded, but it's what I'm trying to convey is that the fact that I wouldn't worry about it unless you're sticking it in your eye from a foot away, you're fine.
Yeah. Okay.
When I go to the dentist, sorry, Kyle.
Go ahead, John.
When I go to the dentist, I take it with the Ego battery and I put it on the windowsill, and I'm probably 4 feet away, but I'm lying back in a chair and they always give you safety glasses. So, there's a study from Columbia that shows when you're actually in a room and you're not looking at the lamp, you're getting less than 20% of that dose. So unless you're sitting there staring at the lamp, you're good.
And the idea is that it's bouncing around the room everywhere, cleaning everything, right? So even if it's further away or right next to you, it's still doing that. What was it? Was it 3,000 square feet, you said?
It really depends on the room layout. So the photons do not bounce in a room. They're direct line of sight. And if you have an object between the lamp and yourself, that space between that object and you is not being disinfected. And that's why we put 2 lamps in a classroom, as a for instance. So it's important that you maintain with the Sabre or any of these products a line of sight to the area that you want disinfected.
Okay. And then last question, thank you, is how does this work outside in kind of the same situation? I mean, obviously I would think it disperses more, but what would you say is like the efficacy of the footage of being within line of sight of outside in a situation? It's
equal. There's no difference. Absolutely no difference. So the
windows open aren't a difference or anything like that?
No, but obviously in outdoors, you're going to have the viral dispersion much quicker and wider than you would in an indoor environment. But there is no difference. In fact, early on in the pandemic, we were asked by the University of Michigan to put together a configuration for their football stadium. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it holds 110,000 people. And their concern was that even that though it was outdoors, you literally have people sitting on top of each other coughing. And unless there was something to protect them, they were going to be vulnerable to transmission. And so we did come up with a configuration to mount, I want to say 80 500-watt units on the light towers and no further than about 250 feet away from all of this, the stands. And we're able to mathematically prove to them that we could basically knock the coronavirus out of the air in just 1 or 2 seconds at any distance within that stadium. So the outdoors, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing, same problem.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Glad to be here. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we have 3 products that are hitting the market this year. We have an eye disinfection unit that actually the prototype is halfway through the 3rd FDA IRB. We've completed 2 right now. This is for ocular disinfection. Very, very powerful tool, very, very safe. And the ophthalmologist that we've been working with now for 4 years, Dr. Rousey, has demonstrated the efficacy of this in his published research. It even can take out what's known as the acanthamoeba parasite, which burrows itself in the back of the eye. And we can destroy that as well. Nothing else can destroy that. So the problem we have with the data so far is that we don't really have a control group because Dr. Rousey sees patients that every other treatment fails. before he applies this. So we don't really have a control, but we are working on that. We are going to go through the FDA, hopefully a 510K process to get this product to market as short as possible. We also created a unit, very simple unit for disinfecting the bores of MRIs, CAT scans, and PET scans. It's really simple. It sits on the table. They turn it on. The unit gets wheeled into the bore. The unit is on at that point and can disinfect the entire bore about 15 to 20 seconds. Right now, they're taking 15 to 20 minutes to chemically disinfect these bores. So 1 or 2 extra exams per day has this thing paid for in about a week. The hand disinfection unit is something that was conceived about 4 years ago, but unfortunately, it's going to have to go through FDA approval for bare hands. We can release this product for those that wear gloves. So whether they be food service workers or healthcare workers that wear gloves, it's very, very powerful. It has a single 100-watt lamp in it with reflective material inside the unit itself. And I believe we're targeting about 8 to 10 seconds to get both sides of the hand with this unit. The hand disinfection unit is something that was conceived about 4 years ago, but unfortunately, it's going to have to go through FDA approval for bare hands. We can release this product for those that wear gloves. So whether they be food service workers or healthcare workers that wear gloves, it's very, very powerful. It has a single 100-watt lamp in it with reflective material inside the unit itself. And I believe we're targeting about 8 to 10 seconds to get both sides of the hand with this unit. In terms of validation, there's finally some technology now that's gotten better over the last couple of years for validating exactly what the results are. In the past, we've relied on surface and air sampling, both on a before and after basis. So the Petri dishes you see on the left there, that was a hospital here in New Hampshire that we did operating room air sampling before our technology was put in, and then after, and yielded tremendous results. They've been a happy customer for a number of years now. But now there are other technologies that can actually detect other pathogens and make it much more readily available and also closer to real-time analysis. So if you look at where our technology has applications, we've defined 28 different use cases. They range from the wine industry to destroying ethylene oxide to agriculture, shelf life, food processing, skin disinfection, eye disinfection. We've identified 28 different use cases, and all but 4 of those use cases, we have customers that are using it for that purpose. This is an example here for education where we look at the 2 sconces on the wall, and again, illustrating the point that we need 2 to prevent the line of sight issue, or what we call shadowing. We have the mobile unit that can be used in education for schools as well. A lot of these schools went out and bought $120,000 robots. They really didn't need to do that because they could just wheel our card in, which is about $14,000, and get an entire room in probably 10 to 15 minutes at the most, depending on the size of the room. So we have recess fixtures, the luminaire, which I've already shown you, and then obviously the room conditioner itself. Transportation is a big one for us. We're about ready to launch into a project with the Dallas Area Rapid Transit Authority to test 6 of their buses. What we're doing there is we're putting a sconce in the front, a sconce in the back, and a sconce in their airflow. They've developed for us a specific type of reflective material that would go on the ceilings and probably on the windows. It's transparent. And what that does for us, it creates a car wash effect of photons. So because it's line of sight, you'll have kids that'll be blocking the other kids from being protected. But with the reflective material, and we have reflective paint as well, and Teflon can work as well, but this reflective material is relatively inexpensive and, as I said, transparent. They'll be sitting in a car wash of photons. We have a number of clients, ambulance, first responder clients, that use both the saber and the ensconce during transport and then after transport. And you can see in this picture here, they've mounted one on a sidewall, and then the saber's mounted on the front wall of the carriage. And they use that saber not only during transport, but then they take it off. It's removable from that wall, and they disinfect all of their equipment, surface disinfection very, very quickly. And there's a lot of equipment in an ambulance that You can't apply chemical cleaners. They can't. They'll wear them out. But the saber works very, very effectively. And this is also, by the way, changed the cleaning protocols from using chemical disinfectants to soap and water, and then our technology. Hospitality is an area that probably suffered as much as anybody during the pandemic, and nobody had an answer for it other than shut the places down. Fortunately for us, we have a number of hospitality clients, restaurants in particular, that have looked at the saber and they look at the ensconce and say that's a powerful combination. And we envision a day where when you sit down in a restaurant, the waiter or somebody will come up and basically disinfect the whole table in front of you in about 5 to 10 seconds. And then you'll look up and you'll see an ensconce on the wall, knowing that full well that air is being disinfected very quickly. So we got a lot of work to do, but I believe that indoor air quality is finally getting its due. You know, we've had the EPA Clean Water Act since 1970. We've had the Outdoor Air Quality Act since before that. And I think you're going to see the EPA come out with an Indoor Air Quality Act sometime in the next 3 to 4 years. And then it'll go into the building codes. Prisons, at least in New Hampshire, outside nursing homes, prisons suffer the most, and it was never talked about. So we actually did install our units in a prison here in New Hampshire. Tough to quantify the results, but nevertheless, we were able to prove to them through air sampling and surface sampling that the technology worked and it was protecting them. First responders, I'll expand on that a little bit. So we're working with ambulance manufacturers right now and distributors to apply this technology. This is, again, on a case-by-case basis. At least in New Hampshire, we did have some grant money available for first responders. And now we've kind of expanded our efforts on more of a national level. So you'll start seeing these in most ambulances, I think, in the next few years. You look at nursing homes who really did suffer and they didn't have a solution whatsoever. They're a logical candidate to put our technology in at least the high traffic areas, and certainly as part of their cleaning protocol as well. So we do have some nursing home clients that have started to implement this technology. They operate on razor thin margins, so price is still a little bit of an issue because their margins are so thin. Healthcare, there's obvious applications within healthcare, whether it be at a nurse station, in a patient room, disinfecting medical equipment. We strongly believe that it's going to start taking the building codes to be adjusted in order to get wide acceptance, at least in commercial spaces. But because of that, we've kind of branched out into all these very specific other cases, whether it be food packaging or factory floors, or just basically different applications, use cases that we can apply this technology. So that's the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Mike, I just wanted to point out something that I had asked John. Can you talk about fish tanks and plants and pets? Because that's another question I think that a lot of people would be interested in.
Yeah, so the whole veterinary market is right before us, and we have anecdotal information on the application of our technology for skin bacteria and also viruses. We do know that it can solve a lot of those problems. We're going to have to go through a process, I think, of further testing, and probably with the USDA, in order to get wide acceptance of the technology in veterinary. But it's not just the application for skin disinfection or eye disinfection for pets. It's also line of sight within the clinic itself, or certainly surgical site infections that pop up during surgeries. We can help alleviate that drastically with the use of our technology in these applications. So I think you're going to see more in veterinary, hopefully in the not too distant future. Plants, that's a little tricky because you have to find the sweet spot of dosage to eradicate something like powdery mildew, but not destroy the plant. So that's almost on a case-by-case basis for each plant. And we've gotten through that with strawberries. We've gotten through that with cannabis. We've gotten through that with a number of different produce items in terms of the appropriate dosage to disinfect but not destroy. And so that's kind of a continuing process for us to keep fish tanks. I don't have any thoughts on that. Nobody's ever asked that before, Kara. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mike, we had some of our employees take sabers home with them last Christmas. And I have a picture of Ginger who put a saber on top of the fish tank. we didn't have a stand at the time.
Oh,
But we used at Christmas last year at my brother's house, Ed, and his girlfriend had the flu. And her son flew in from Florida that day and tested positive for COVID. So he wore a mask and stayed mostly in his room, but we put a saber up in the dining room, and he was able, and she was able to all have Christmas dinner with us, and nobody else got sick. We had 7 people in the house, 2 were sick, and the other 5 never got anything, the flu or COVID. So I wouldn't have been there if I didn't have the saber.
yeah, good point. I see we have Michael Hicks in the audience here, and I believe it's the same Michael Hicks. He's a user of the saber. Michael, do you have anything to add?
Hey, no, I mean, I have absolutely no regrets about getting the saber. I've used it a number of times for anything from like having friends over for dinner and so on. We put it on the mantle and that sort of thing. And now we haven't had any kind of real world tests like John did, where we have people who are known to be sick with something.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I love the technology and the capability that it gives us to kind of bridge the gap between where we are and where people who are not COVID conscious anymore are, and just to keep things safer.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. Looks like we have Kyle has a question.
There's one came in first in the chat
Okay.
from the Muses, and it says, is there any chance for regular income households to afford this? And then Daniel Kinder says, also interested in this information. Can you speak a little bit to price and the, typical consumer and how that's coming along?
It's not inexpensive, but if you look at our life cycle cost of a saber, for instance, while it may be $4,000 fully loaded, it's going to last a number of years. It's 30,000 hours for the lamp, and it's a 4-year warranty on the body. So you're going to get a lot of utility out of it for that amount of money. Now, we do offer through a third party a financing program where it's $0 down, and it's approximately, and you can go anywhere up to 5 years in terms of financing. So you can do the math on that. But that does make it more affordable. I want to say the payments can go from like $70 to $95 per month, depending on the term, how long you go. But there is that option as well.
Okay, Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to share my experience as well for anyone who's thinking about picking up a saber. I mean, John and Mike have been wonderful in answering my questions for a month leading up to that purchase. I run an entertainment company in Seattle, and as far as I know, I'm the only one in the area who is, or the states around me, having this technology at weddings. And as far as people, I've heard some people wonder if I'm self-conscious having that up, and what it is it looks like a light. It's just a basic light on a stand. Most people don't even know it's there. It just kind of exists in the background. People will ask about, yep, right there. And I think people are really receptive to the technology. They want to learn more about it. And, I always talk about, I feel like we're in the Wild West with this technology where it's like, we're not wrong, but we're early, right? Like it's, as you guys have been talking about, it's going to be in business places with business codes, putting it in and just having a normalization of this technology. It's been wonderful to have at my wife's chemotherapy appointments, and doctors will ask what it is, and other patients will ask. And it's exciting to have conversations like this. It's exciting to have the word out in the community, and people know, whether you come from a high income bracket or you're someone who's working month to month, that we're all deserving of this technology. And I think it's really exciting to get the normalization of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, we wish that the price could get lower. It's obviously volume driven to a large extent. So over time it will come down, and we're hopeful that we can get it in more people's hands as we can lower the price.
I have a question. This is just, it's not really related to whether we buy them here or not. Have you approached the U.S. Green Building Council about getting lead points for this?
We have not, and it really is a result of our own personal bandwidth that, with 28 different use cases, 28 different directions we can be going, and we're still operating as a small business. There's only so many people to talk to. That's a great suggestion. And if you could forward Kara anything that you might have on that, we'll follow up and get to them on that. But that's a great suggestion.
If all you would have to do is have Green Building Council give you, say, 5 points for your LEED certification for using that technology, or 10, and they would probably do it. And if they did it, you would have to get a huge amount of funding to support that. It would be really huge. But that I'll pass it on to Kara. She can pass it on to you.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so Moon says, what's the maximum indoor effective range of the Sabre? So I know you've talked a little bit about shadowing and a little bit about crossing. Of the Sabre, how many feet are you going to insta-destruct a COVID virus?
Yeah, unless you're in Jeff Bezos's house, you're going to be able to put a Sabre up in the corner of your living room and protect everybody in the living room, and maybe put one up in the kitchen and protect the entire kitchen without any problem whatsoever. Now I'm talking about aerosolized viral particles. I'm not talking about C. diff on the surface or MRSA. Keep that in mind, that you need to be in closer proximity for surface disinfection, but at least as it relates to aerosolized viruses or influenza, one Sabre is going to do it for an average household.
And then Jessica K says, if the school's going to buy for each classroom, is there a price break? And yeah, I think you do have some volume discounts. And I don't know, I think you and John were talking about some sort of coupon or something for our groups that we could pass around too, but I think each individual school could work something out with you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple answers there. So John will get you a program that we put together for your group that will offer a discount and an incentive to purchase at least a Sabre, probably the ensconce as well. We did develop a program for schools where we were able to put 2 ensconces in a classroom for $9.98 per day. That's 365 days a year, but you can double it if you want for 180. Less than $20 per day per classroom day, with a 3-year minimum term. And that included the installation, that included a lifetime warranty on the product, and that included replacement lamps in the school itself if something were to happen. So again, the schools, in large part, they froze. They had all this money and resources available to them, and they just didn't do anything with it. Some of this, they got some more salaries, I guess, and some more administrative people, but they didn't really do anything productive, in my opinion, in terms of solving the problem.
Yeah, a lot of us are upset about that as well, because they didn't even up their ventilation and their air filtration, much less by UV.
Well, the one thing I'll say on that also is virtually half the schools have huge issues with mold, and they're not addressing it. And our technology addresses it like instantly. And they're not addressing it. And so we've kind of pivoted in terms of our approach with school districts to talk about mold now instead of COVID.
Exactly.
One of our people that bought the Luminaire has a Pilates studio in Pennsylvania, and she also has wood allergies. And she says when she goes in and turns on the lamp into her studio, within 10 or 15 minutes, her allergies are gone. Her symptoms disappear. So anybody with allergies, we have done testing at a chocolate factory that showed we break down all allergens.
So we have a question here, and it says, can someone walk us through how we would take this into a doctor's appointment? How would we use it in the office? Through the lobby, in an elevator? Maybe not, but I'd be interested in exactly how to use it in this situation. So I don't know, I'm imagining like some sort of backpack and the light shining on you or something. Is that what we're thinking of?
No, the Ego battery has a strap, so you can hold the Ego battery over your shoulder and just carry the Sabre with you.
Just have it on and operating with the Ego battery. And then when they get into the office itself, like John described earlier, just put it on a shelf with the line of sight, with you in the line of sight, and the doctor too, hopefully. And that's how it'd be used. John, have you run into any issues with your dentist in terms of him pushing back on the use of it? I don't think we've heard anything like that.
Everywhere I've gone, they're more curious than pushback. In fact, the dentist wanted me to send him information, and he ended up buying a sconce. So there is a group, and you guys probably know it, that has all the businesses across the country that are COVID friendly. And our dentist in Ohio has 5 of them, one in each dental office. He gets people driving 2 hours from Cleveland to go to his dental clinic.
Yeah, dentists are, that's like the worst spot, that you can be other than.
Every dentist isn't doing it.
Okay, I
Crazy.
just hit the settings, so you guys should be able to unmute yourself now if you have questions. So Michael, I think you should be able to do that.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to comment on the use of the Ego battery. I mean, that I use that a lot because it's like we sold our house in Idaho Falls, so we had people tromping through the house, showing the house and that kind of thing. And basically, I just strapped the thing on, with the battery and went through the house afterward and sanitized the air. That made it real convenient. And like, if I wanted to, and we had some garage sale kind of things going on, where we had people, because we were getting rid of a bunch of stuff, and I would set it up on a shelf in the garage and just have it, so anybody coming in the garage, and I just connected it to the battery because there wasn't a convenient plug. Because I already had, tools that used, Ego batteries. So that is a really handy feature that I've already used quite a bit.
I'll give everybody a hint. If you considering buying the Ego battery, go look at buying the leaf blower, the least expensive leaf blower that comes with a 2.5 amp hour battery and a charger. And you'll find that is cheaper than just buying the battery and the charger alone. So it saves you, I think, about $50. And they sell them on Amazon, Lowe's, or Ace Hardware. And we have people, commercial units that they bought 2 of them. They keep one on the charger while they're running, and you can pretty much run the entire time, because when you're walking around disinfecting objects, you're turning it on and off. And that's how Mike said you get 3 hours, at least 3 hours on a battery. Whereas if you go into an appointment and just run it continuously, I get about 68, 69 minutes on a fully charged battery.
I don't know how many of you actually take Ubers or Lyfts, but what I would do if I was somebody that used those services, I'd have the saber on as I got into the car, disinfecting that whole interior in about 5 seconds, and then sit down and leave it on in the back seat while I was being transported. I mean, I just can't believe people are still getting in cars like that. It's what's going on.
If you all know, in Vegas, they have Teslas going between under the tunnels. And I went down and disinfected the Tesla before I got into it. And the entire trip through the tunnel, the driver wanted to know what it was all about.
Cool. What is the distance for surface disinfection that you guys would recommend, like the time and the distance for going over things, if that was a need?
We generally say about 1 to 2 inches. And depending on what you're after, if you're after COVID, it's almost instantaneous. You can do 12 inches per second with a saber at a distance of 1 to 1.5 inches. Very, very quick. If it's C. diff, like in a hospital room, you're going to have to make several passes with the wand, because the dosage required to get C. diff at log 3 is 50 times the dosage it takes to get COVID at log 3. So it really just depends on the pathogen, but certainly the aerosolized stuff happens almost instantaneously. And the surface bacteria, they're pretty quick too, for the most part. So you can get probably in 3 or 4 passes of the wand, get any bacteria that might be on the surface.
And your hand being close to that is fine, because we mentioned that earlier, like just.
Oh, yeah.
You're not getting any exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I try to get it as close to the surface as I can. When I go over, duvets or something, or the seats, I put it right down onto the seat.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, you don't want to sit on the couches in hotel rooms.
Can it disinfect through water? I'm just thinking of, I read a study once about Las Vegas swimming pools, and it was similar to those. Not that I'm going to a Las Vegas swimming pool. I'm just curious if maybe they shouldn't be putting these lights in the Las Vegas swimming pool somehow.
Yeah, ozone is a much better use for a swimming pool, because aren't you into wastewater? Because they use thousands of lamps. Your flow of water is in the thousands of gallons per minute. So it would take too many lamps. And literally they're using up to 1,000 UVC lamps in some of these wastewater treatment plants. But we are doing some things to do at the faucet. RUV is instant on, so there's no warm up time. and our lamps are hollow, so we can put the liquid right down through it. And that's why the wineries are so interested, because they can be able to recover some bad wine that is going sour by putting it through our lamp instead of a millipore filter, which takes a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we actually developed a unit for Houston Methodist Hospital to put in line with their water holding tanks that they pump water up to the 15th floor of the hospital. And they had 2 Legionella outbreaks in the last year. And so we're able to basically deactivate the Legionella that's in the water on its way up to the floors, because it's in line. As John said, we're running it right through the unit itself.
I'll share a couple of use cases with us since we have a little extra time. This is what I do when I go to the hotels. It fits diagonally in a checked bag, but I put it up, and the only thing you have to worry about is to make sure your fans behind the Sabre have air. This was at a high school reunion. I put it on brackets inside the room. We had a couple of luminaires, and it was getting up to 3,000 on the CO2. This is exactly what I did in my dentist. I took the picture from my seat and I put it on the sill with an Ego battery, and I'm about 4 feet away from it. This was at the National Superintendents Association in Austin. We put either Sabres in each meeting room or sconces on tripods. This again was at the class reunion, and we had them in the corners of the ballroom. This was, I talked about Thanksgiving or Christmas. This was the Christmas dinner, and that's in the corner of when we had a COVID positive and a flu. The only thing I would suggest is move the plant a little bit away, because after 3 days, these leaves started to wilt. You can overdose a plant the way we've found with marijuana. This was at another meeting. Again, Sabre above people's heads. We've talked about the ambulances. And I think I got a couple more. Here's your fish tank. And before we had to stand, we were putting them on mantelpieces. So those are some use cases that we've done before.
I saw there was a question in the chat about who the dentist was in Ohio that's using this. I believe he's in Steubenville, Ohio.
He's in Youngstown. It says Struthers, but he's right across the border. The TV station that did the report on him got the wrong town. So he's in Youngstown,
Okay.
Ohio, and it's Mark DeGenova.
All right, guys. Let's take a few more questions. You're not going to have another opportunity anytime soon to get this level of far UV knowledge in front of you. So please speak up, ask your questions, because I know that there's going to be lots of questions flying in the groups later, and these are the guys who know how to answer them. So please feel free, unmute yourself, ask the questions here. We'll take about another 10 minutes and avail ourselves of these resources that we have in front of us.
If you go to sterilray.com, there's a contact form. You can fill out the contact form and send us questions, or just email info@sterilray.com.
I had a question about the fans. I wasn't expecting them, and they're not loud or anything, but what are those exactly doing? Is it just keeping it from overheating, or could you explain a little bit about the fan technology that's in it?
The lamps actually do heat up, but you'll be happy to know that our lamps actually have the lamp itself, and then we have what's called a carrier tube, which is an additional tube outside the lamp. So what we're doing is we're trying to keep it cool and keep it from overheating. Those fans have plenty of power to do that. In our more high-powered products, we actually blow the air between the carrier tube and the lamp itself. So just depending on the configuration, but at least with the Sabre, the lamps keep everything cool.
Got it. And it was mentioned, to make sure I have it clear in the chat, that when you talked about the lamp losing its oomph over time, it's that it turns white. Is that correct? Like, it's just like very clearly it's not working as it should.
The 222 photons fluoresce the quartz, the light blue that you see. When there's no longer putting out 222, the lamp is totally white.
Got it. Okay, cool.
That for you should be about 10 or 12 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
Kathleen?
Hi, it's Kathleen. Thank you again for being here in your presentation. So as Kara said earlier, I'm used to the layered approach and using every layer that I can find and is available at the circumstance. But I'm so excited by your presentation. I'm envisioning that I could have a saber set up in my home and let my friends come in the house unmasked and would be safe. Is that a fair expectation that someone could walk into my home with a saber and be COVID positive and the virus would be killed so quickly it wouldn't endanger others in the indoor location?
That's an absolute accurate assessment. Bearing in mind, though, that we do have an issue with shadowing. So you'd want to place the saber probably in a corner where you would maximize your line of sight exposure. But even if you were temporarily shadowed and viral particles were coming out as somebody's breathing or talking or singing or whatever, the air in your house is actually moving. It's not static. So the good news is that within a matter of a couple of seconds, those viral particles are traveling to the point where they would encounter the photons. So I think you've perfectly outlined how we see it being used in a home environment.
And
And being the COVIDer that I am, I want to point out that you could test everybody and have an air filter running with substantial air exchanges and use the lights for that layered approach, and you would still have people out with their mask off, but you would be exponentially safer. The slide that you guys showed that showed the 99% deactivation at the different times, I was immediately thinking, oh, like an N99 mask, right? Like if you actually have line of sight within an efficacy distance, it's almost like having an N99 mask on. But definitely, we would still encourage people to utilize, I mean, even if you were doing your FlowFlex rapids that have, a better efficacy than your regular rapids, and you had your air filters running, the air filters will help you push the viral particles in front of those lights too. So the combination of a UV light and an air filter, they enhance each other, which is something else to keep in mind.
And I wanted to say that's exactly what we did when we had some friends over. We didn't do the testing part, but I had of course the Rosenthal box running in the room. We had a very large dining kitchen area, and I had the saber up on the mantle. And yeah, that's exactly what we did.
I have a question. So essentially what this thing is going to do is it's going to take the protein enrobing of the encapsulated virus, and it's going to destroy the protein, which means that the vaccine is just, or the actual virus is just genetic material that's not infectious anymore. Is that correct?
Correct.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Okay.
It
Well,
literally-
that pretty much, and you're saying that it's safe to assume that it will be effective within, say, 25 feet.
We use the back of the envelope calculation of 2 watts per foot. So to the saber, it's actually 150 watts. So we would say linear distance of 75 feet. Now the difficulty with the saber is that the viewing angle, if you will, of the photons coming out of the lamp itself is much more limited than the ensconce. So on the ensconce, we've got reflective material on the back of the ensconce. So we're taking advantage. We have less of that with the sabers. We have some, but it's less. So,
but if you had 2 of them sitting at each end of an open floor plan house that was 50 feet across, essentially it's going to be safe.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. That was really, the rest of it's all nice and everything, but you had me at that. So there we are.
Judy,
Okay.
I think Judy has a question.
So it sounds like you've been able to install in some schools, and we have a situation where we have to take in-person testing and don't have a lot of control over, who's in the room, et cetera. And I'm wondering if the school, it's documented that it's a product that's allowed in schools, that I would be able to petition them to bring this into a local school here for a test.
So other than California, we haven't run into any situation where regulations would stand in the way of this being used in schools. No regulations whatsoever. Canada, that's a problem. California has significant requirements for validating the ozone emission from these types of lamps. So we have a number of teachers who have bought the Saber for themselves, and they bring it into the classroom with them on their own accord. So
Okay, we are in California.
yeah,
Um,
and there's no regulation per se, other than we have to meet their ozone emission standards, which we do by a significant amount. So you'd have to check with your California CARB agency.
okay, thank you.
What, pardon me, what is your ozone emissions level?
It depends on the lamp and the power of the lamp. So
Obviously.
we start at about 5 parts per billion and go up to about 25 parts per billion, depending on the power level.
That's all?
That's it. Yes.
Shit howdy. Okay, dude, you
Of course.
close the deal.
Sign Randy up.
Let me show you a video that illustrates what we're talking about. So if you've got downlights, they're only giving you 40 degrees and they're only going to be out 5 or 6 feet. And if they're pulsing, then you're not covering the entire area. And they could be off. I saw some of them that are off for up to 12 minutes between. Whereas if you put a sconce on the back wall, we're flooding. We have a car wash of photons, 10 to the 15th photons per square centimeter per second. And if you put one on the sidewall, then you're eliminating any shadow details. If you could see the photons, this is what you'd be seeing.
The same principle applies with the Saber as well. It's basically the same.
Correct.
Hey, Cara, any other questions?
I think we're good. Thank you guys so much for coming and taking all this time to explain everything to us. And again, John, do you want to say again the email people can email? Was it info at?
Yeah, if you go to our website, it's sterilray, STERILRAY.com. And then the email is info@sterilray.
But Mike, you said that you guys would be sending out a packet that we can distribute to the group specific.
We are. Yeah, we're going to send that to you, Cara, and then you can distribute it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great.
I'm sorry, can I sneak just one quick question in?
Sure.
This is Kathleen, and I'm not science background. I've been trained ozone bad, ozone scary. But based on your reactions and Randy's reactions, it is so small, it would not be an issue. Can you just speak briefly to that?
Yeah, so ozone occurs naturally, depending on where you live, at anywhere from 20 parts per billion up to, say, 30, maybe as much as 50 parts per billion. Small areas are going to have higher concentrations of ozone. So that's what's in the air already. And what happens with certain lamps that aren't produced correctly, they do produce additional ozone. So beyond what is in the air, that ozone can accumulate at a certain rate. Ozone also decays at a fairly quick rate as well. So there's a bit of a calculus that you have to enter into for what is the lamp producing in terms of additional ozone and what's the decay rate. And there's a lot of factors that go into the decay rate. Does the room have curtains? Does it have fabric materials? Does it have carpet? All of those things absorb ozone and help minimize, if you will, the level of ozone that's in a room at a given time. So, we're very, very familiar with it. The actual name of the original company was High Energy Ozone. So we really have an understanding of ozone and how it's applied and the good and the bad of it. But we're very, very cautious with our lamps in terms of the ozone production. Randy, you want to add to that? Because I think you probably know a little bit about it, but
I've got a meter that reads to let's see, 100th of a part per million. Normally the ozone meters that you can buy on Amazon and what have you aren't sensitive enough to actually matter. You said you spend about $700, and I did because, you know, I'm weird that way. You can get a meter that will tell you whether there's a safety hazard. And what I did to test, because I've been running 254 lights, 200 watts of them on tripod stands in my house when I want to zap the place and make it cootie free. I will set them up, run them about 5 minutes. I'll run 200 watts in a room that's 10 by 12 foot, and I'll run it for 5 minutes from 3 different points. There's no shadows, and it'll sterilize the air, and it'll sterilize pretty much anything on the surfaces for fomite transmission. And it'll also kill any mold that happens to be handy, and it'll blind you if you're in the room. And I stuck 200 watts in the bathroom, and I turned it on. I left it there for an hour with the meter running, and the lights that I'm using don't generate any ozone. There was zero there. But this thing is like 2 orders of magnitude less than what I was generating. This thing is absurdly good. I'm a happy boy. I'm going away now. I've got to go eat dinner. Thank you all for taking the time to tell us what's going on. I mean, yeah, it's expensive. It needs to be. You're making a custom product. You're making a watch finder. It's worth the money. I mean, you know, I was looking at it and I was somewhat askance at it, but I've also looked at an awful lot of bullshit products, and yours is not a bullshit product. You get the snarky electrician's seal of approval. It's an excellent product. You know, I will give Kara some information because the truth is if you were able to actually get an inroad into lead and get points for a lead thing, and that would guarantee you manufacturing unlimited amounts of these and selling every one you could do, which is like the whole point of being in business. Anyway, I have dinner waiting.
Could come down for the consumer. You could just, you know, stick it to them again for the corporate ones and let the consumers have a more affordable model.
Well, it's all based on flow. I mean, they're making these things one at a time because it's a pain in the ass to make them. You've got to pump the things down. You've got to make the tubes. You've got the cost, and it explains why the cost is what it is. But the truth is, if you're making 100,000 of them a month, it's an economy of scale is going to be in place. You know. So anyway, yeah, it's worth the money. Yeah, it's a valid product. The fact that they can pump them down later and reuse them. If they're smart, they have a recycling plan in place where you can get a discount on exchanging your tubes.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I can't find it, and I had a whole lot of snarky, shitty things I was going to ask, and none of them have merit. You know, I was a designated bitch here, guys. So y'all are good. You know, I'm going to go talk to my wife, and yeah. This actually is a way of giving you your life back. And that's worth an awful lot right now. So anyway, I'm going to go now. I'm done being a bitch. Y'all have a nice time.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Randy.
Thanks, Randy. And for the rest of you, keep in mind that we can offer financing with 0 down. So that's also an option.
Great. Awesome. So thank you guys so much, and we'll wait to hear from you, and I'll get the information from Randy to you guys, and then from you guys out to the group. This has been recorded. I will post it, and it's probably my favorite one of these that we've done. So can you send me a link to that aerosol, the one at the very beginning that you used to illustrate like you know, aerosol diffusion, because there's a few out there that I've seen, but yours is the best one too that I've seen as well. So if I could get a link to that I can periodically push out, that would be fabulous. But
I'll send it to you tomorrow, Kara.
Awesome. But you've definitely got a lot of us excited, and that means we're going to go talk about it and and see, because like Randy said, for many of us, you know, our lives have been really put on hold, and this is a way to keep ourselves and our families safe that can give us, you know, a lot more confidence as we try to reintegrate to the extent that we need to. So.
Well, thank you very much, Kara, for putting this together, and thanks to you all for attending, and feel free to run any questions through Kara, and we'll get back to you right away. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.